The cries from the barn cut through the Montana winter like a knife. And when Cade Quinlan pushed open the door expecting to find a dying animal, he found instead a woman alone in the straw, her face twisted in agony as she clutched her swollen belly. The year was 1882, and the snow had been falling for 3 days straight across the plains near Victor, Montana. Cade had ridden out from town to check on the old Morrison place, a ranch abandoned years ago after its owner died. He had been thinking about buying the property, fixing it up, maybe finally putting down roots after years of drifting. The last thing he expected to find was a woman in labor, alone and shivering in a barn that offered little protection from the brutal cold. "Help me," she gasped, her green eyes wild with fear and pain. "Please help me." Cade dropped to his knees beside her, his heart hammering. He was 30 years old, had faced down outlaws and broken wild horses, and survived a bullet wound that should have killed him. But nothing had prepared him for this. The woman looked young, maybe 22 or 23, with long dark hair plastered to her face with sweat despite the freezing temperature. "I am going to help you," he said, forcing his voice to stay calm even though panic clawed at his chest. "What is your name?" "Grace," she panted. "Grace Jensen. The baby is coming. I cannot stop it." Cade shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, then looked around the barn desperately. There was old straw scattered across the floor, a few empty stalls, and nothing that resembled supplies. The wind howled through gaps in the wooden walls, and he could see his breath in the air. "Where is your husband?" he asked, already moving to build a fire in the center of the barn where someone had clearly made one before. There was a circle of stones and old ashes. Grace let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Dead. He died 3 months ago. Fever took him." Cade's hands worked quickly, gathering the driest wood he could find from a pile near the door. "Family. Anyone who knows you are here." "No family," she said through gritted teeth as another contraction seized her. "We were heading west. John wanted to start over in Oregon. We stopped here when I got too tired to travel anymore. He went to town for supplies and came back sick. I buried him behind the barn." The fire caught, and Cade fed it carefully until flames leaped up, casting dancing shadows across the barn. The heat was minimal but better than nothing. He pulled off his gloves and rolled up his sleeves, his mind racing through everything he had ever seen or heard about birthing. His mother had been a midwife back in Kansas before consumption took her when he was 15. He had watched her help bring babies into the world more times than he could count, had heard her instructions and advice. He prayed that those memories would be enough. "How long have you been laboring?" he asked, moving back to Grace's side. "Since last night," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I could do it alone. I thought I was strong enough, but it hurts so much and I am so scared." Cade took her hand and she gripped it with surprising strength. "You are not alone now. I am going to help you through this. My name is Cade Quinlan, and I promise you, we are going to get this baby born safe." He did not know where the certainty in his voice came from, but he saw Grace's expression shift, saw hope flicker in her eyes. She nodded, squeezing his hand again as another wave of pain crashed over her. The next hours were the longest of Cade's life. He heated water in an old bucket he found in the corner, using melted snow from outside. He tore strips from his spare shirt to use as clean cloth. He talked to Grace constantly, keeping her focused, keeping her breathing. She told him about her life between contractions, about growing up in Pennsylvania, about meeting John Jensen at a church social and falling in love with his dreams of the West. About how those dreams had died in this cold barn with John buried in frozen ground. "I wanted to leave," she confessed, her voice raw. "After he died, I wanted to just keep going west like we planned, but I got so tired. The pregnancy made everything harder. And then the snow came and I could not leave. I have been surviving on what John left, rationing everything. I thought maybe after the baby came I could figure something out. You will figure it out, Cade said firmly, and you will not be doing it alone. He did not know why he said it. Did not know what made him make that promise to a complete stranger. But something in his chest had shifted the moment he laid eyes on her, something that went beyond simple compassion. Grace Jensen was fighting for her life, and her baby's life with a courage he had rarely seen. Her husband's death had left her stranded and alone, but she had not given up. She had found shelter, made it last, and now she was bringing new life into the world against impossible odds. As dawn broke on the second day, painting the sky beyond the barn walls in shades of pink and gold, Grace's labor intensified. Cade could see the terror in her eyes as the contractions came faster and harder. "I cannot do this," she sobbed. "I cannot." "Yes, you can," Cade said, his voice fierce. He positioned himself where his mother had always positioned herself during births, trying to remember every detail. "Grace, look at me. Look right at me. You are the strongest person I have ever met. You have survived things that would break most people. You can do this." She stared at him, her whole body trembling, and then she nodded. Cade talked her through each push, his hands steady even though his heart was racing. He had delivered foals and calves, but this was different. This was a human life, tiny and fragile, depending entirely on him not to fail. When the baby finally emerged into his waiting hands, slippery and small and perfectly formed, Cade felt something in his soul crack wide open. The infant let out a wail that filled the barn, strong and healthy and alive. A boy. Grace had a son. "You did it," Cade said, his voice breaking as he wrapped the baby in his coat and placed him in Grace's arms. "You have a son, Grace. A beautiful, healthy son." Grace stared down at the baby, tears streaming down her face. Her whole body shook with exhaustion and emotion. "He is real," she whispered. "He is really here." Cade tied off the cord with steady hands, cut it with his knife that he had held in the fire to sterilize. He delivered the afterbirth and checked Grace carefully, relieved to see that while she was bleeding, it did not seem excessive. His mother's voice echoed in his memory, guiding him through each step. When he was satisfied that Grace was stable, he built up the fire higher and found his spare blanket in his saddlebag outside. "You need to rest now," he told Grace gently. "Both of you need rest." But Grace caught his hand before he could move away. "Thank you," she said, her voice fierce despite her exhaustion. "You saved our lives. I do not even know how to begin to thank you." Cade looked down at her, at this woman who had endured so much, at the tiny baby in her arms, and felt that strange crack in his soul widen further. "No thanks needed," he said softly. "I am just glad I came out here when I did." He settled beside them, keeping the fire fed, keeping watch. Grace drifted in and out of sleep, the baby nursing at her breast with instinctive hunger. Cade found himself unable to look away from them. The dawn light grew stronger, filling the barn with pale winter sunshine. The storm had finally broken, and the world outside was silent and white and new. "I need to get you somewhere warm," Cade said when Grace woke again, more alert now. "Somewhere with proper shelter and supplies. Can you ride?" Grace looked uncertain. "I do not know. I feel very weak." "My horse can carry all three of us into Victor," Cade said. "It is only 5 miles. I have a room at the boarding house there. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, is a good woman. She will help us." "Us," Grace repeated, and there was something in her voice, a question and a hope. Cade met her eyes steadily. "I am not leaving you alone, Grace, not now. Not until you are strong and safe and have everything you need." Something passed between them in that moment, something wordless and profound. Grace nodded slowly, then looked down at the baby in her arms. "He needs a name," she said softly. "What would you like to call him?" Cade asked. Grace was quiet for a long moment. John wanted to name a son after his father, William, but she trailed off, then looked up at Cade. "You brought him into this world. You saved us both. Will you help me choose his name?" Cade felt his throat tighten. "I would be honored." They discussed names while Cade prepared for the journey, carefully packing what little Grace had managed to gather in the barn. She told him that she liked strong names, simple names. He suggested Matthew, and her eyes lit up. "Matthew," she repeated. "Matthew Jensen. Yes, that feels right." But as Cade helped her to her feet, supporting her weight while she clutched baby Matthew to her chest, she said something that made his heart stumble. "Or maybe Matthew Quinlan," she said quietly. "If you meant what you said, about not leaving us alone." Cade stopped walking, turned to face her fully. Grace's face was pale but determined, her green eyes clear and direct. "I do not need charity," she continued quickly. "And I do not need pity, but I heard what you said when Matthew was being born. You said we are going to get this baby born safe. You said ours. I heard it, Cade. And I felt it too. Something changed in this barn last night. Maybe it is crazy. Maybe it is just the circumstances making us both feel things that are not real. But I think it is real. I think you feel it too." Cade stared at her, this woman he had known for less than a day, and knew she was right. Everything she said was true. He did feel it, had felt it from the moment he saw her fighting through her pain with fierce determination. Had felt it grow stronger with every hour they spent together, with every word she spoke, with every glimpse of her strength and courage. And when Matthew was born, when Cade held that tiny life in his hands, something had shifted in his heart. He had looked at Grace and the baby and thought, mine. Thought family. Thought, this is what I have been searching for. "It is real," he said hoarsely. "Grace, I know it is crazy, I know we just met, but you are right, I felt it. When you said you were alone, when you told me about your husband dying and leaving you stranded, I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. And when Matthew was born..." He stopped, shook his head. "When I held him, I did not think of him as your son. I thought of him as ours." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Then maybe we should stop fighting it. Maybe this is one of those things that just is, whether it makes sense or not." Cade wanted to kiss her, wanted it with a fierceness that surprised him. But she was exhausted and had just given birth and needed care, not passion. So instead he took her hand, threaded his fingers through hers and lifted it to his lips. "Let me get you to safety first," he said gently. "Let me make sure you and Matthew are warm and fed and healthy. And then we will figure out the rest." The ride into Victor was slow and careful. Cade's horse, Smoke, was a steady gelding who barely flinched at carrying 3 people. Cade sat in the saddle with Grace in front of him, her back against his chest, Matthew bundled between them. He kept one arm around Grace's waist, holding her secure, and used the other to guide Smoke through the snow-covered landscape. Grace was quiet during the ride, but Cade could feel the tension in her body, the way she fought against exhaustion and pain. He talked to her softly, keeping her alert, telling her about Victor and Mrs. Patterson and the boarding house. He told her about his plans to buy the Morrison Ranch, to fix it up and make it profitable again. He told her about his years of drifting, working on different ranches, never quite finding a place that felt like home. "Why did you drift?" Grace asked, her voice tired but curious. "My parents died when I was young," Cade said. "Father in a farming accident, mother from consumption a few years later. I had no siblings, no family left. I worked whatever jobs I could find, saved what I could. I always thought someday I would find the right place to settle, the right reason to stop moving." "And now?" Grace asked. Cade tightened his arm around her slightly, felt Matthew stir against them. Now I think I found it. When they reached Victor, it was mid-morning and the town was bustling despite the snow. Victor was a small settlement but growing, with a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church at one end, and a scattering of houses spreading out beyond. People turned to stare as Cade rode down the street with Grace and the baby, and he could see the speculation in their eyes. He rode straight to the boarding house, a two-story structure painted white with green shutters. Mrs. Patterson came out onto the porch as he dismounted, her round face creased with concern. "Cade Quinlan, what in heaven's name?" she started, then stopped when she saw Grace and the baby. Her expression shifted immediately to one of compassion and efficiency. "Get her inside right now. Bedroom at the top of the stairs, first door on the left. It is empty and has a good fireplace." Cade carried Grace up the stairs, Mrs. Patterson following with Matthew. The room was small but clean, with a large bed covered in quilts, a fireplace already laid with wood, and a window that looked out over the town. Cade set Grace gently on the bed, and Mrs. Patterson immediately took over, shooing him out while she helped Grace into a clean nightgown and examined her, and the baby. Cade paced the hallway, his heart racing with worry and relief, and a dozen other emotions he could not name. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Mrs. Patterson emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "She is exhausted and weak but healthy," the older woman said. "The baby too, strong little fellow, but Cade, what is going on here? Where did you find her?" Cade explained the whole story, watching Mrs. Patterson's expression shift from shock to sympathy to something that looked almost pleased. "Well," she said when he finished, "you did a good thing, bringing her here. She will need time to recover. Probably a few weeks before she should be up and moving much, and the baby will need watching. But between you and me, we can manage it." "I will pay for the room," Cade said immediately, "whatever it costs, and food, supplies, anything she needs." Mrs. Patterson gave him a knowing look. "You are a good man, Cade Quinlan, I always said so. But this is more than just being good, is it not? I saw how you looked at her." Cade felt heat rise to his face. "I only just met her, Mrs. Patterson, but yes, there is something there, something I cannot explain." The older woman smiled. "Sometimes the heart knows before the head catches up. My late husband proposed to me 3 days after we met. We were married 42 years before the Lord took him home. Time does not always matter when it is right." Over the following days, Cade barely left Grace's side. He slept on a pallet on the floor of her room, ignoring Mrs. Patterson's offers of his old room down the hall. He brought Grace meals and helped her when she was too weak to do things herself. He held Matthew while Grace slept, rocking the baby and marveling at how small and perfect he was. He changed dirty cloths and heated water and learned how to swaddle and burp and soothe. Grace watched him through all of it with eyes that grew softer each day. They talked for hours, learning about each other in the forced intimacy of the small room. Grace told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, about her parents who died in a house fire when she was 19, about meeting John and thinking he was her salvation, her chance at a new life. "I did love him," she said one evening, firelight casting shadows across her face while Matthew slept in her arms. "But it was not the kind of love I thought it would be. John was a good man, but he was distant. He had his dreams of the West, and I was part of those dreams, but I was not the dream itself. Do you understand? I was a piece of the picture he wanted, not the center of it." "That must have been lonely," Cade said quietly. Grace nodded. "It was. But I thought it was what marriage was supposed to be. I thought maybe I was asking for too much, wanting to feel like I mattered more. Wanting to feel like someone saw me, really saw me, and chose me because of who I was, not because I fit into their plans. She looked at Cade then, and the intensity in her gaze made his breath catch. "You see me," she said softly. "I do not know how after such a short time, but you do. You look at me like I matter. Like Matthew and I are not just people you are helping out of obligation, but people you want." Cade moved closer, knelt beside the bed so he was at eye level with her. "You do matter, Grace. You and Matthew both. And it is not obligation. I want to be here. I want to take care of you. I want—" He stopped, struggling for words. "I want things I have no right to want after knowing you for less than a week." "What things?" Grace asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I want to marry you," Cade said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I want to call Matthew my son. I want to buy that ranch and fix it up and fill it with life. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build something real and lasting. I want a family." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I want those things too. I know it is fast. I know people will think we are crazy. But Cade, when you held me in that barn and told me I could do it, when you looked at my son like he was precious, like he mattered, I felt something I never felt with John. I felt seen. I felt cherished. And I thought, this is what it is supposed to be like. This is what I have been missing." Cade reached out and cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear. "Then let us be crazy together. Let us take this strange, impossible thing and make it work." "Yes," Grace whispered. "Yes, Cade. I will marry you." He kissed her then, soft and careful, mindful of Matthew sleeping between them. It was a gentle kiss, full of promise and hope, and the beginning of something neither of them could fully name yet, but both recognized as important, as real. When they pulled apart, Grace was crying in earnest now, but her smile was radiant. "When?" she asked. "When should we marry?" "Whenever you are ready," Cade said. "Whenever you are strong enough. I am not going anywhere." They decided to wait a month, giving Grace time to recover fully from the birth. During those weeks, Cade finalized the purchase of the Morrison Ranch, signing papers and arranging for supplies. He hired workers from town to help make repairs, focusing first on the house, making it warm and weatherproof. He bought furniture and dishes and all the things a home needed. He built a proper cradle for Matthew, working late into the night by lamplight, carving the wood with care. Grace regained her strength slowly but surely. Mrs. Patterson helped her with exercises to rebuild her stamina, and by the third week, she was able to walk around the boarding house without getting dizzy. She spent hours with Matthew, nursing him and talking to him and marveling at every small change in his tiny face. And she spent hours with Cade, learning more about the man she had agreed to marry. She learned that he was patient and kind, but also strong-willed and determined. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor and a quick smile. She learned that he was fiercely protective of the people he cared about and had a sense of honor that went bone deep. She learned that he loved horses and hated beans and could play the harmonica passably well. She learned 100 small things that made him real and human and hers. Cade learned that Grace was not just strong but resilient in ways that amazed him. She had survived losses that would have destroyed other people and come through with her capacity for hope intact. She learned that she loved reading and had a beautiful singing voice, and was surprisingly funny when she relaxed enough to let her guard down. He learned that she worried about being a burden, about whether she was making the right choice, about whether Cade would wake up one day and regret taking on a widow with a baby. He learned to reassure her with words and actions, to show her every day that he had meant what he said in that first week, that she and Matthew mattered, that they were wanted. The town of Victor watched their courtship with interest. Some people whispered that it was too fast, that Cade was being foolish, that Grace was taking advantage. But most people saw the way they looked at each other and remembered their own stories of love and chose to be happy for them. Mrs. Patterson became their most vocal champion, telling anyone who would listen about how Cade had delivered that baby in a freezing barn and saved 2 lives. "If that is not fate, I do not know what is," she declared to anyone who expressed doubt. They were married on a cold February morning in the small church at the end of Victor's Main Street. Grace wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Patterson helped her make, and Cade wore his best suit, his hair slicked back and his hands shaking slightly as he waited at the altar. Matthew, now 6 weeks old and growing steadily, was held by Mrs. Patterson in the front pew, wrapped in a blanket Grace had stitched with careful hands. The ceremony was short and simple. The preacher spoke about love and commitment and the mysterious ways that God brought people together. When he asked Cade if he took Grace to be his wife, Cade's voice was strong and clear. "I do. With everything I am, I do." And when Grace said her vows, looking into Cade's eyes with an expression of absolute certainty, he felt his heart expand with something that felt like joy and gratitude and love all mixed together. "I do," she said. "I take you as my husband, Cade Quinlan. And I promise to be your wife, your partner, your family. I promise to build a life with you to face whatever comes together. I promise to love you." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and told Cade he could kiss his bride, the kiss was deeper than the first one they had shared, more passionate, full of promise. The small congregation applauded, and Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, Matthew sleeping peacefully through it all. They had a small celebration at the boarding house afterwards, with cake and coffee and well wishes from the townspeople who had come. And then, as the winter sun began to set, Cade helped Grace into the wagon he had bought for the ranch, settled Matthew in her arms, and drove them home. The Morrison Ranch looked different than it had the day Cade found Grace. The house was repaired and painted, smoke curling from the chimney, windows glowing with lamplight. The barn where Matthew had been born was weatherproof now, ready for the horses and cattle Cade planned to buy in the spring. It looked like a home, like a place where a family could grow and thrive. Cade carried Grace over the threshold, making her laugh, then went back for Matthew. He lit lamps throughout the house, showing Grace everything he had done. The kitchen with its new stove and cupboards full of supplies. The sitting room with comfortable chairs and a bookshelf that he planned to fill with books for her. The bedroom upstairs with a large bed and that cradle he had made, positioned near the window where morning light would stream in. "It is perfect," Grace said, tears shining in her eyes as she looked around. "Cade, it is absolutely perfect." "It is ours," he said simply. "All of it, our home, our life, our family." That night, after Matthew was fed and sleeping in his cradle, Cade and Grace lay together in their bed for the first time as husband and wife. They made love slowly, carefully, both of them still learning each other's bodies, both of them overwhelmed by the emotion of it. Grace cried afterwards, but when Cade asked worriedly if he had hurt her, she shook her head. "Happy tears," she whispered, pressed against his chest. "I am so happy, Cade. I did not think I would ever feel this way. After John died, after I was alone in that barn, I thought my life was over. I thought the best I could hope for was survival, but this—" She lifted her head to look at him. "This is so much more than survival. This is living, really living." Cade kissed her forehead, holding her close. "I know what you mean. I have been surviving for years, just moving from place to place, never letting myself want too much. And then I found you, and suddenly I wanted everything. I wanted it all, and now I have it." They fell asleep tangled together, and when Matthew woke crying in the early morning hours, Cade was the one who got up, changed the baby's cloth, and brought him to Grace to nurse. He sat beside them in the dim lamplight, watching his wife feed their son, and felt a peace he had never known before. The winter turned to spring, and with it came long days of hard work. Cade bought cattle and horses, hired a few ranch hands to help with the work. Grace turned the house into a true home, hanging curtains and planting a garden and cooking meals that filled the kitchen with warmth and delicious smells. Matthew grew and changed, his eyes brightening, his tiny hands learning to grasp. He smiled his first smile at Cade, and Cade felt like his heart might burst from his chest. "He knows you are his father," Grace said, watching the two of them with a soft expression. "I am his father," Cade said firmly, "in every way that matters." They never spoke of John Jensen much, but Cade made sure that Grace had a way to remember him. He carved a proper headstone for the grave behind the barn and made sure it was maintained. When Matthew was old enough, they would tell him about the man who gave him life, but they would also make clear who raised him, who loved him, who chose to be his father. By summer, Grace was pregnant again. She told Cade one evening while they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the Montana plains, Matthew playing with a wooden horse at their feet. "Already," Cade said, surprised but delighted. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Grace said, laughing at his expression. "Mrs. Patterson confirmed it when she visited yesterday. She says the baby will come in late winter, probably February again." Cade pulled her into his arms, careful of Matthew, who was now crawling and trying to climb everything. "Another baby. Grace, we are going to have another baby. Are you happy?" she asked, and he heard the slight uncertainty in her voice. "Happy," Cade repeated. "Grace, I am the happiest man alive. A year ago I had nothing but a horse and some savings and no idea what I wanted from life. Now I have a wife I love more than anything, a son who makes me smile every single day, a ranch that is starting to thrive, and another baby on the way. How could I be anything but happy?" Grace relaxed against him, her hand moving to her still flat stomach. "I am happy too, scared but happy. I did not think I would want more children so quickly, but I do. I want Matthew to have siblings. I want our family to grow." "Then it will," Cade said simply. "We will build the family we both always wanted, the one we did not have growing up." The pregnancy was easier than the first, with Grace healthy and well-fed and safe. She bloomed as her belly grew, her face glowing with contentment. Cade was attentive to her every need, making sure she did not overwork herself, hiring a woman from town to help with the housework and Matthew when Grace was too tired. He read to her in the evenings, rubbed her swollen feet, and told her constantly how beautiful she was. Matthew took his first steps in October, stumbling toward Cade with a determined expression that made Grace laugh until she cried. By Christmas, he was walking confidently and starting to say simple words. "Papa" was his first word directed at Cade, and the look on Cade's face made Grace's heart squeeze with love. "You are his whole world," she told Cade that night. "Both of you, him and the baby I am carrying. You are their world, Cade. You gave us everything." "You gave me everything first," Cade countered, his hand resting on her rounded stomach. "You gave me purpose. You gave me love. You gave me a reason to stop running and start building." The second baby was born on a cold February night, almost exactly a year after Grace and Cade's wedding. This time there was no freezing barn and desperate fear. This time Grace labored in their warm bedroom with Mrs. Patterson attending and Cade holding her hand. This time when the baby emerged, crying lustily, it was into a world of safety and love. "A girl," Mrs. Patterson announced, placing the baby in Grace's arms. "A beautiful baby girl." Grace looked down at her daughter with wonder, then up at Cade with shining eyes. What should we name her? They had discussed names for weeks but never settled on anything. Now, looking at his daughter's tiny face, Cade thought of everything he and Grace had been through, all the pain and loss that had led them to each other. Hope, he said softly. I want to call her Hope, because that is what she is, what all of this is. Hope for the future. Hope that good things can come from hard times. Grace smiled through her tears. Hope Quinlan, it is perfect. Matthew was fascinated by his baby sister. He wanted to touch her constantly, to pat her head and hold her hand. Cade and Grace supervised carefully, teaching him to be gentle, watching as he learned what it meant to be a big brother. The house rang with new sounds, Hope's cries and Matthew's babbling and Grace's singing and Cade's low voice reading stories in the evening. The ranch prospered. Cade proved to be a skilled rancher, and his reputation for honest dealing brought him good prices for his cattle. By the time Hope was 6 months old, they had paid off all their debts and were saving money. Cade hired more help, built another barn, expanded the house to add 2 more bedrooms. For the other children we will have, he told Grace with a grin. Other children, Grace said, raising an eyebrow. How many are you planning on? As many as we are blessed with, Cade said, pulling her close despite Hope sleeping between them and Matthew playing at their feet. I want this house full of life and noise and love. I want everything we did not have growing up. Grace kissed him softly. Then that is what we will have. 2 years later, Grace gave birth to twin boys. The pregnancy had been difficult, with Grace sick for the first few months and exhausted for the rest. But when the boys arrived, healthy and loud and identical, all the hardship seemed worth it. They named them Samuel and Jacob, and Matthew and Hope were enthralled with the babies. The house was chaos now, but it was joyful chaos. 4 children under 4 years old kept Grace and Cade busy from dawn until long after dark. They hired a nanny to help, a young woman from town named Clara who was patient and kind and good with the children. But Cade and Grace were always the center of their children's world, always present for meals and bedtime and the 100 small moments that made up family life. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Cade took Grace out to the barn where they had first met, where Matthew had been born. It was a warm summer evening, and the barn was clean and organized, full of healthy animals and good equipment. Nothing like that desperate cold night 5 years earlier. I wanted to bring you here, Cade said, holding Grace's hand as they stood in the spot where he had found her. I wanted to remind you of where we started, of how far we have come. Grace looked around, remembering the fear and pain and desperation of that night, remembering how alone she had felt, how certain she was going to die. And then remembering Cade pushing through the door, Cade's steady voice, Cade's strong hands bringing her son into the world. I was so scared, she said softly. I thought it was the end. I thought I had nothing left to live for except the baby, and I was not even sure I could bring him into the world alive. And then you came. You saved us, Cade. You saved our lives. You saved mine too, Cade said, turning to face her fully. I was lost before I found you, Grace. I did not even know how lost until I walked through that door and saw you fighting so hard to survive, to bring new life into the world despite everything you had been through. You showed me what strength really looks like. You showed me what love could be. You gave me everything I never knew I needed. Grace wrapped her arms around his neck, tears streaming down her face. I love you so much. I loved you from almost the beginning, even when it seemed crazy, even when it seemed impossible. I looked at you and I knew. This is who I am supposed to be with. This is who I am supposed to love. I knew it too, Cade said, holding her tight. I knew it when I held Matthew for the first time in thought hours, when I looked at you exhausted and in pain and still so brave and thought mine. I have never stopped thinking it, Grace. You are mine. Matthew is mine. Hope and Samuel and Jacob are mine. All of it, this whole beautiful life, it is mine and yours and ours. They kissed in the barn where their story began, and it was sweet and passionate and full of 5 years of love and partnership and building a life together. When they pulled apart, Grace was smiling. "Let us go home," she said. "Let us go home to our children." They walked back to the house hand in hand, the Montana sunset painting the sky in brilliant colors. Through the windows, they could see Clara moving around inside, hear the children's laughter. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the garden Grace had planted was in full bloom. Everything about the scene spoke of life and love and permanence. Years passed in a blur of growth and change. Matthew grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and spent hours following Cade around, learning everything he could about ranching and horses and cattle. Hope was bright and curious and fearless, always climbing things she should not and asking endless questions. Samuel and Jacob were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into mischief together. Grace had 2 more children in the following years, another girl they named Faith and a boy they named Caleb. The house was full to bursting with noise and activity, and though there were hard days and exhausting nights, Cade and Grace never forgot how lucky they were. They had both known loss and loneliness, had both lived through times when the future seemed dark and uncertain. Now they had everything they had ever dreamed of and more. On Matthew's 10th birthday, Cade took him out to the barn and showed him the exact spot where he had been born. Matthew listened wide-eyed as Cade told him the whole story, about finding Grace alone and in labor, about delivering him into the world, about those first terrifying and miraculous hours. "So I am not really your son," Matthew said when Cade finished, his voice small and uncertain. Cade knelt down so he was eye level with the boy. "You are absolutely my son," he said firmly. "In every single way that matters, you are my son. I was there when you were born. I held you first. I have been your father every day of your life. The man who gave you life was a good man, and we honor his memory. But I am your father, Matthew. Never doubt that." Matthew thought about this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I am glad you found us," he said. "I am glad you are my papa." Cade pulled him into a hug, his throat tight with emotion. "I am glad too. You made me a father. You gave me a purpose. I love you, son." As Matthew grew older, Cade made sure he knew the truth about his birth, about John Jensen, about everything that had happened. But he also made sure Matthew knew that family was about more than blood. It was about choice and love and commitment. It was about showing up every day and doing the work and being present. And by that definition, Cade was Matthew's father in every way that counted. The other children grew too, each developing their own personalities and dreams. Hope announced at 12 that she wanted to be a doctor, which was nearly unheard of for a woman, but Grace and Cade encouraged her, getting her books and supporting her ambitions. Samuel wanted to be a rancher like his father, while Jacob dreamed of traveling east to see the cities. Faith was artistic, always drawing and painting. Caleb was still young, but he showed signs of being as serious and responsible as Matthew. Through it all, Cade and Grace remained each other's anchor. They had disagreements and hard days, times when money was tight or the children were difficult or illness swept through the family. But they never forgot what they had promised each other on that wedding day. They were partners, facing everything together. They were in love, deeply and truly, and that love only grew stronger with each passing year. On their 20th anniversary, their children threw them a party. The house was full of people from Victor and beyond, friends and neighbors who had watched their family grow over the years. Matthew was a young man now, 20 years old and working the ranch alongside his father. Hope was away at school back east, training to be a nurse since medical school would not accept women. Samuel and Jacob were 17, both tall and strong and full of plans. Faith was 15 and already selling her paintings in town. Caleb was 12 and the baby of the family, though he hated being called that. Mrs. Patterson, now quite elderly but still sharp as a tack, raised a glass to toast them. 20 years ago, I saw a young man carry a woman and baby into my boarding house, she said, her voice carrying across the crowded room. I saw the way he looked at her, like she was the most precious thing in the world, and I thought, that is a man in love. Some people doubted them, thought they were rushing things, but I knew, I have always known, love does not follow a timeline, love just is, and these two have built something beautiful. A family, a life, a love that has weathered every storm and come through stronger. So here is to Cade and Grace Quinlan. May you have 20 more years and 20 after that. Everyone drank and cheered, and Grace felt tears streaming down her face. Cade pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Are you happy?" he whispered, echoing the question she had asked him so many years ago. "So happy," Grace whispered back. "More than I ever dreamed possible." They danced that night, the two of them, while their children and friends watched and smiled. They danced the way they had on their wedding night, holding each other close, moving in perfect sync. And when the party finally wound down and everyone went home, they sat on their porch in the quiet darkness, hands linked, watching the stars. "Do you ever think about that night in the barn?" Grace asked. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not come?" "Every single day," Cade said honestly. "I think about it and I am grateful. Grateful that I decided to check on the property that day. Grateful that I heard you. Grateful for every choice and chance that led me to you." "I think about it too," Grace said. "I think about how alone I felt. How scared. And then you were there and suddenly I was not alone anymore. I have never been alone since that moment, Cade. Even on days when you are out working and the children are gone, I do not feel alone. Because I know you are coming back. I know you chose me. I know you love me." "Always," Cade said, lifting her hand to kiss it. "I will always choose you. I will always love you, until my last breath, Grace." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the Montana plains. The ranch spread out around them, solid and thriving, a testament to years of hard work and love. Inside the house, their children slept safe and warm. Everything they had built together, everything they had created from that one desperate night in a freezing barn was real and lasting and good. "We should go to bed," Grace said eventually, though she made no move to stand. "We should," Cade agreed, also staying where he was. They sat a while longer, neither wanting to break the spell of the moment. Finally, Cade stood and pulled Grace to her feet, and they walked into their house together, just as they had done thousands of times before and would do thousands of times more. The years continued to pass. Matthew married a woman from a neighboring ranch and gave Cade and Grace their first grandchildren. Hope eventually came home with a nursing degree and opened a clinic in Victor, serving the town and surrounding ranches with skill and compassion. Samuel took over more and more of the ranch operations, while Jacob eventually left to see the world, sending letters from places that seemed impossibly far away. Faith married an artist and moved to Helena, where her paintings hung in galleries. Caleb followed Matthew into ranching, the two brothers working side by side just as Cade had always hoped his sons would. Cade and Grace grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper, richer, more precious with each passing year. They had built something remarkable together, not just a successful ranch, but a family full of love and purpose and joy. On a warm summer evening when Cade was 56 and Grace was 52, they walked out to the barn one more time. It had been rebuilt and expanded over the years, but the original structure was still there, preserved deliberately. This was where their story had begun, and it felt right to return to it. "You have any regrets?" Grace asked, leaning against Cade's shoulder as they stood in the spot where Matthew had been born. Cade thought about the question seriously. He thought about all the choices he had made, all the paths he had taken. He thought about the years of drifting before he found Grace, the loneliness and lack of purpose. He thought about that cold winter night when he had pushed open the barn door and found his entire future waiting for him. "Not a single one," he said finally. "Everything I did, every choice I made led me here, led me to you, led me to our children and grandchildren and this life. So no, Grace, no regrets." Grace smiled, the expression lighting up her face in a way that made Cade's heart skip, even after all these years. "No regrets," she agreed. "Just gratitude, so much gratitude for every moment we have had together." They stood there as the sun set, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and pink and orange. They stood in the place where they had met, where their son had been born, where their life together had truly begun. And they held each other close, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that finding. Inside the house, their family waited. Grandchildren who wanted bedtime stories, children who had come for dinner and stayed to talk. The sound of voices and laughter drifted across the yard, calling them home. Cade and Grace smiled at each other, shared one more kiss in the barn where everything had started, and then walked hand in hand toward the light and warmth and love that filled their home. Their story had begun with desperation and fear, with a woman alone in a cold barn and a man who happened to be in the right place at the right time. But it had become so much more than that first desperate night. It had become a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of choice and commitment, and showing up every single day. It had become a family, multiple generations now, all stemming from that moment when Cade Quinlan pushed open a barn door and found Grace Jensen bringing new life into the world. He had delivered the baby and called it theirs. And in doing so, he had found his home, his purpose, his heart. He had found everything he had been searching for without knowing he was searching. He had found love, real and true and lasting. And Grace, who had thought her life was over, who had believed she would die alone in that freezing barn, had found salvation and love in a partner who saw her, truly saw her, and chose her every single day. She had found a man who loved her son as his own, who built a life with her that exceeded her wildest dreams, who never once made her feel like a burden or an obligation. Together, they had created something remarkable. A family, a legacy. A love that would endure long after they were gone, carried on by their children and grandchildren and all the generations to come. As they stepped into their house, surrounded by the noise and chaos and love of their family, Cade and Grace Quinlan knew with absolute certainty that they had lived a good life. They had built something real and lasting. They had loved deeply and truly. They had honored the chance meeting that had brought them together by making every day since count. And when they finally went to bed that night, in the room where Hope and Faith and Caleb had been born, in the house they had built together, they fell asleep the way they always did, wrapped in each other's arms, hearts beating in sync, grateful for every moment they had been given and every moment still to come. Their story had started in a barn on a cold winter night, but it would continue for many more years, through grandchildren and great-grandchildren, through the legacy they had built. The Morrison Ranch would remain in the family for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they chose each other, when they committed to making a life together no matter the obstacles. And somewhere in the barn, in the spot where Matthew Quinlan had taken his first breath, the memory of that night lived on. The memory of a cowboy who found a woman laboring in the cold, who delivered her baby with his own hands, and who looked at that tiny life and claimed it as his own. Who looked at a widow he had just met and saw his future. Who made a choice in that moment that changed everything. It was a story they told their children, who told their children, who told theirs. The story of how Cade and Grace Quinlan met. The story of a love that started in the most unlikely of circumstances and grew into something that would outlast them both. The story of a family that began with a man and a woman and a baby born in a freezing barn and became something beautiful and enduring. And through it all, through every retelling and every generation, one truth remained constant. Love does not follow rules or timelines. Love does not wait for the perfect moment or the right circumstances. Sometimes love happens in a barn on a cold winter night. Sometimes love happens when you least expect it, when you are at your most vulnerable, when you think you have nothing left to give. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, you find someone who sees past your circumstances to the person you truly are. Someone who chooses you, not despite your history, but because of all the things that history has made you. Someone who delivers your baby and calls it theirs, who builds a life with you from nothing, who loves you every single day for the rest of your life. That is the kind of love Cade and Grace had, the kind of love that endures.